Do right, do me right, yeah. I need love, yeah. Knocking down my do right in the morning, do right in the evening, do right in the morning, do right.
Legs just got fallen asleep. I think it's frostbite. I'm feeling very outdoory, you know, and I'm feeling quite sort of all beardy and hairy and stuff. And over the years, I've had varying degrees of a bigger beard and more hair. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I was in this cafe in Oxford Street in Sydney, and I bumped into Pete Murray, you know, the singer Pete Murray. He had that great Feeler record. Anyway, he's buying a cup of coffee at the same time I'm getting a cup of coffee. And when they arrived at the same stage, they came out at the same time, and he kindly bought me a cup of coffee, you know, which is very nice of him. And his record company was just around the corner in Oxford Street, Sony Music, and unbeknownst to me, someone from his record company watched the whole thing happen. And she went back to Sony Music and she said, "Oh, that Pete Murray, he's such a dreamboat. But not only is he a great singer and he's good looking, but I just saw him buy a cup of coffee for a homeless person." You know, people either talking here today or not, you know, always thinking about talking and all that sort of stuff. And the first time I spoke about my passion, which is design and architecture, and I'd been known for other things, known for stand-up comedy and, you know, blokey Aussie sort of comedy. And the first time I was sort of asked to talk about things like I could collect furniture and I love modernist architecture, I was asked to open the Sydney design at the Powerhouse Museum, and I was pretty excited about it, but I was also really nervous about it because it was the first time. And 2 minutes before I went on stage, the woman who'd booked me came up to me and said, "I'm just letting you know, the curators didn't want you to do tonight, but you're going to be fantastic." and of course I was awful, because it was, you know, it's failure, and I failed that day. And I'm going to talk a bit about failure and a little bit about making an impact. But, you know, like, one thing to be nervous about talking, but I'm involved in this program called Ignite, and it's a mentor program for kids in Wagga Wagga. And we do some great stuff with kids who have been dealt a pretty rough life. And the first time I went down to Wagga Wagga to talk about it was to launch. And the one thing I launched for, you know, at night, but obviously the kids that are in the juvenile justice system or who are part of the program, they couldn't come to the launch because they're in jail. But they said to me, "Oh, look, you come along and you have a cup of tea with the kids and a piece of, you know, awful cake and say good day and that'll be it." And so, which I'd never been inside a prison before, and these lovely kids, and, you know, they're all sort of nervous, but we're also in this sort of big rec room, and we're having a piece of cake and a bit of a cup of tea, and then the woman from Ignite said, "Oh, look, you know, because you guys can't be there tonight, you know, when Rosso's going to do his speech, he's prepared an inspirational talk for you. Over to you." And I'd, of course, prepared nothing because I had no idea that it was going to happen. And I had to talk to these kids for half an hour about you sort of, you know, whatever I could think of off the top of my head. So it's worse to be asked to talk off the top of your head than to sweat over it for ages. And I junked everything that I was going to talk about today on the way down because I just sort of thought I sort of felt that I was going to walk into this room coming down from Sydney in a different mindset. If I came pre-prepared with stuff, I'd sort of be out of whack with where you guys are at. And it occurred to me when I was walking around how important the Australian bush is to me and how it makes you feel and how good it is and how, you know, you feel like your lungs are blowing up like they're supposed to be, and you feel like we're supposed to. And like, as Australians, you know, for many of us, it's the beach that does it for, it's the ocean that makes us whole. But for me, the bush has this great power over me. And when I was probably 6 years ago, I went on a trip with my mum to Tasmania. I went to Cradle Mountain, and it was a shitty time of my life, a really shitty time of my life, and bad relationship, work was a bit not where I wanted to be, and all those sorts of things. And I was carrying around a lot of that. So I went to Cradle Mountain, and I did the walk around the crater by myself. It's only 6 or 7 kilometres. Mum's husband's legs are a bit wonky, so they couldn't do it. And it's that beautiful sort of healing power of nature. And as I walked around the crater, just every little step I take, I felt like those little bits were just falling off the back of me. And I was like, oh, and this sort of And by the time I'd done the 7 kilometres and I just sort of this crisp air, this beautiful Tasmanian wilderness, I was a completely different person. And I was like, wow. And then the next day I flew back to Melbourne and I went to this wedding and I sat next to a woman who was now my wife. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would have been that happy, smiley person. And, you know, I think I come back to this idea of sort of talking about the impact you can make and what your legacy is. And everyone tries so hard, thinks about it so much, about what you want to do and what you're trying to make an impact and make a difference or make some noise in what I do and the industry that I chose to be part of, which is the media industry, and my background, stand-up comedy, radio and TV. When I was at what my peers would call my most successful, I had a television show on Channel 9, I had a #1 breakfast radio show in Sydney, I was miserable. I was not in control of my career. I was trying harder to be heard and wanted to make more impact. I was never really truly happy with everything that we were doing. And if you ever read a biography or autobiography, there's this constant line, through line that goes through with people who have got profile or are famous. And then they're always dissatisfied that no one gave them enough. No one really said I was great enough. And it's such a ridiculous thing to do. And the industry I chose to be part of, our failure is measured in ways that most people don't have to deal with. And it's a blood sport in the media when, you know, a television show gets axed or someone loses their job, you know, wouldn't happen, you know, no one's going to, if something happened, you know, people get sacked from a bank, it's a tragedy, but for some reason, you know, when someone loses their job in the media, it's taken with glee. And I was doing this TV show for Channel 7 called Australia Versus, and I very much doubt anyone could remember it. Anyway, I'm filming it down in Wollongong, so I thought, you know, which was lovely. And we spent a month there that weekend, and I'd recorded half the show, and then the rest of it had to be done the next day for this whole 12-part series. And I was just doing what they call, you know, these links, just pieces to camera in this terrible old theatre, staying in this crappy motel. And I watched the first episode go to air that night, and it wasn't very good. And the next day, on my way to film, the ratings came in. They weren't very good. And then we did the first lot of filming at about 10 o'clock. I got a message from the network. They're thinking about moving the show already to a later time slot. Then at lunchtime, they told us that the show was going to get axed after one outing. So they took us off to commiserate that night because there was no point. They said, oh, you're not going to film the next day. That's it. It's all over. So they took us to the Hog's Breath Cafe, and showbiz ain't it grand. And then we got a phone call from the network. They changed their mind, and they wanted to keep recording it the next day. So we're going to finish off the series. And I thought, this is not bad enough. I'm working on a crappy television show, and I'm in Wollongong in a bad motel. I woke up the next day, and I opened up the newspaper. On page 2, there's a photo of me, and the headline was, "Is this the worst television show ever?" And we all know that's The Love Boat, not my show, but it was awful. And at the time, I used to be in a duo, and that had finished up. And what the ramifications of that for me is that obviously, you know, your failure plays out in the media, but it also meant that my name gets taken off the whiteboard for a period of time, and it means you can't work, and no one really wants to know anything about you. And so it was good for me because I think failures can be fantastic for you, because I started to think about what I really wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to people wanted to give me some money to write a book, and there I was, and I love writing a book because it's just me and a computer and my stories and things that I could talk about. And so I wrote this book, and I was really proud of it, and I showed it to people. People liked it, and people read it, and then we put it out, and it didn't really sell so much well in the first week. And my publisher, Allen and Unwin, at the same time, or a little bit before, we released a book with Arn Doe, and The Happiest Refugee. Some of you probably read it. It's been a smash hit, and it's a wonderful story about his life. And we were put together in the first few weeks to do a one-off event in one of the bookstores, and it was me plus another guy, Akmal Saleh, who's a comedian as well, and had done a book. And we had all these people turned up, mostly to see Arn talk about his stuff. And he gets up and he tells his wonderful story about being a refugee and coming out here in the early 1980s, and everyone just loves it. And then they just said to me, look, you've got to talk about what's in your book. And my book was called Mum Had a Kingswood. And so after Arn gets up and I said, got to talk about your book, Arn gets up and talks about his wonderful story about being on the boat and the pirates coming and all that stuff. I can't do his gear. I get up and, you know, talk about how Mum bought a Kingswood and we went to Adelaide. And I just watched 200 Asians just fuck off out of the bookstore. And anyways, we're sitting there and, you know, lining up to sign the books. And Arn's got this, you know, this line that goes right out round the corner. I've got no one. Akmal hasn't even bothered hanging around. He's just gone, whatever. And I'm sitting there, and one woman's got Akmal's book, he's got Arn's book, and I said to her, like, do you want to make it the trifecta? And she said, no, thanks, Rosso, I'm fine. So, but what happened was I loved my book, and I believed in my book, and so I just went to every bookstore I could, and to every, you know, I went to Big W, and I had a stack of 100, and I'd sit there for, you know, sometimes 2 hours until I sold all of them. And the book ended up selling quite well. But what I learned out of that is once I was doing that with the book and I started talking, I started telling my stories, and I realised that what I wanted to do was, you know, forget all the past, and I chucked out 20 years worth of material, and I started doing what I want to do, which is I do stories and I do live shows in modernist houses, and because I love architecture and I love design, and I do. And I sing in it because I like singing, and I fell in love with performing again, and you know, which is the most important thing. Somehow along the way, I'd forgotten all about it. And the thing about this that I think was interesting, and why on my way down here, and I was thinking about Anzac Day, and I was thinking about this whole idea of impact and what you could do, and how I was thinking about how I could do so many amazing things, and I was thinking about topicality and how it plays out. And when I was a kid, I remember going to church, and it was 1980, and John Lennon had just been killed, and somehow the minister, he put it into his sermon. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. This guy just banging on about Noah and stuff is suddenly talking about someone I've seen on Countdown. And it's sort of wonderful thing. And he talked about it in terms of John and Yoko breaking up and then getting back together, and how important it is to reconcile. I thought it was wonderful, and how that's stuck with me, and that's 20 odd years later, or longer than that, 35 years later, that Tom Howells was this pastor that we, you know, when I was a kid. And it reminded me, when I was when I was driving down here as well, I was thinking Anzac Day, and you know Rick Stein, the TV chef, he was telling me about why he loves Australia, and how he ended up here and doing stuff, and what it turned him on. And when he was a teenager in Cornwall, they started surfing in Cornwall, and of course, because they're Poms, they all started drowning, and so they started getting all these Australians started going out there to as lifesavers, went there and to, you know, save people's lives. And he's a kid, and he meets these lifesavers, and they're laconic sort of Aussie guys, and he's attracted to this, you know, the Australian way of life, and of course it makes him want to come out here in his late teens. And it reminded me of a story my mum's husband told me, and he's in his late 80s now, but he was, as a kid in Wiltshire, he's living right near the Air Force base where they're doing all the training. And one day he hears this plane go overhead, and he hears this explosion, and he comes out the back, looks out the backyard, this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful farm he had, and he sees this tiger moth, this plane has gone through between these two trees, and he runs out, and this pilot gets out, because the wings have just completely come off, you know, both sides of the plane. This pilot gets out the back, out of the plane, out of the wreck, and he's okay. And he's an Australian pilot, and he takes off his goggles and helmet, and his blonde hair going everywhere. And he goes, fuck, have you got a phone? I've got to ring base. And Michael, of course, he's 13 or 14 years of age. He'd never seen or heard an Australian before, simpler times. And ultimately, he's sort of like, wow, who's this guy? And he comes back to the house, and Michael was telling me how the one thing he did know about Australia was he was embarrassed they're having rabbit for lunch, and he was embarrassed because they knew that rabbit was a pest here in Australia, and he's really taken by this guy, and you know, they developed this little friendship while he's still training. Then after the war, this Aussie pilot from Brisbane, his parents come out and they stay at Michael's house. And when Michael got married for the first time, the parents, because rationing was still going on in London, the parents sent out all of the fruit for the fruit cake for their wedding cake, which I thought was just so lovely. And then I sort of said to him, I said, well, so what happened? What happened to that pilot? You know, what happened to that pilot? In the way that, you know, all those people who lived through those wars and those moments did. He said, oh, he got shot down over the channel, and that's why his parents came out, because they wanted to visit the monument there for his war grave. And because of that pilot, Michael at 40 had this feeling that he wanted to come to Australia, so he brings his 5 kids and he moves out to Australia, and he gets his farm in Albust, and he ends up with 6 kids, and they have kids, and they have kids. And now there's 150 kids running around because of this one pilot from Brisbane who died so senselessly over the channel. And if you think about impact, the smallest things you can do in your life can change people and things. So I think if you just be, and you're just being a good person and a decent person, who knows what you're going to do, what someone's going to say one day, something you're going to do that's going to turn people on, and you're going to make an impact without jumping up and down and saying you're awesome. So there you go. Thank you.